Let me tell you about the wild start of a man who would change the world. But first, he had to survive being given away. That's right, folks. Our boy Steve Jobs entered this world with a plot twist straight out of a soap opera. His biological parents, Joanne Skeeble and Abdul Fattah Jandali, were young, in love, and facing some serious family disapproval. Joanne's dad? Not a fan of her Syrian boyfriend. So what's a couple to do in 1955? Well, they decided to give baby Steve up for adoption. But here's the kicker. Joanne had one condition. Her son had to be raised by college graduates. Enter Paul and Clara Jobs, a blue-collar couple who desperately wanted a child. There was just one problem. Clara never graduated college, and Paul didn't even finish high school. So how did they land the world's most famous adopted son? Simple. They promised Joanne they'd send little Steve to college. Spoiler alert, that didn't exactly go as planned. Now, let's talk about the Jobs household. Paul was a machinist who loved tinkering with cars, and Clara was a bookkeeper who doted on Steve. They weren't rich, but they poured everything into their son. And Steve? Well, he was a curious kid with a knack for electronics and a temper that could melt steel. One time, he threw a tantrum because he didn't get the right kind of oatmeal. Yep, even geniuses have their diva moments. But here's where things get interesting. Steve grew up in what would become Silicon Valley, surrounded by engineers and tech geeks. His neighborhood was basically a playground for future innovators. And Paul Jobs? He taught Steve how to take apart and rebuild gadget skills that would later, help him build a little company called Apple. Oh, and let's not forget the other bombshell in this chapter. Steve found out he was adopted at age 5. How? A neighborhood kid casually dropped the news like it was nothing. Steve's reaction? He ran home crying, and his parents reassured him with the ultimate mic drop. We chose you. That moment stuck with him forever. So there you have it, the chaotic, emotional, and slightly messy origin story of Steve Jobs, a kid given away, raised by loving parents, and destined for something extraordinary. Let me tell you about the most unlikely tech bromance in history, folks. Picture this: a barefoot hippie who bathes once a week, and a clean-cut engineering nerd who thinks body odor is a crime against humanity. That's right, we're talking about Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, the original odd couple of Silicon Valley. Their first meeting? Pure comedy gold. Was showing off his homemade computer terminal, and Jobs, being Jobs, immediately saw $signs where saw circuit boards. Classic case of the artist meets the salesman. Woz would later say, "He was the first person I met who knew more about electronics than I did." High praise from a guy who built a working computer just for fun. Now here's where it gets juicy. These two Steves started pulling pranks together like tech-savvy Dennis the Menace. Their masterpiece? The legendary Blue Box, a device that could hack phone systems to make free calls. Jobs, ever the entrepreneur, saw a business opportunity. Was ever the purist, just wanted to prank the Pope. Spoiler, they never actually called the Vatican. But the thought alone is hilarious. The garage startup myth begins here, people. Forget fancy offices. Jobs' parents' garage became tech history's most famous real estate. While Woz built the Apple I with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, Jobs sold it with the charm of a carnival barker. Their first big sale? A local computer store ordered 50 units. 50 for 2 guys working out of a garage. That's like selling 50 homemade rockets to NASA. But here's the kicker: Jobs insisted they pre-assemble every computer, while Wah wanted to sell DIY kits. Guess who won? The control freak, of course. This became Jobs' signature move: style over specs, experience over engineering. The seeds of Apple's philosophy were planted right there, between soldering irons and pizza boxes. Was the Mozart of circuitry, but Jobs? He was P.T. Barnum with a soldering iron. When was finished the Apple II's revolutionary design, Jobs threw a tantrum about the ugly circuit board layout. "Even if nobody sees it, I'll know," he screamed. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how you get beige boxes to sell like iPhones in 1977. Their partnership was like chocolate and chili peppers, weird but magical. Woz's technical genius needed Jobs' reality distortion field to change the world. And Jobs? He needed Woz to build the reality he wanted to distort. Together, they turned a hobbyist gadget into the first personal computer normal people actually wanted. The rest, as they say, is history. Well, almost, because the real drama is just beginning. The stage is set, the players are in position, and the world will never be the same again. Let's talk about the moment Steve Jobs decided that college wasn't for him, because, let's be honest, when you're Steve Jobs, even dropping out becomes legendary. He enrolled at Reed College, a pricey liberal arts school, but quickly realized he was spending his parents' life savings on something he didn't care about. So, he did what any visionary would do. He quit. But here's the twist. He didn't leave. He stuck around, crashing on friends' floors, auditing classes for fun, and diving into calligraphy, philosophy, and Eastern spirituality. Picture this: a barefoot, unshaven Jobs wandering around campus, sitting in on classes he wasn't paying for, and soaking up knowledge like a sponge. He fell in love with calligraphy, of all things, those beautiful, flowing fonts that would later become a hallmark of Apple's design. Who knew that dropping in on random classes would shape the future of personal computing? Then there's the LSD. Oh yes, we can't skip that. Jobs later called his psychedelic experiences one of the most important things he ever did. It blew his mind literally and opened him up to new ways of thinking. Was it reckless? Maybe. But for Jobs, it was all about expanding consciousness, breaking boundaries, and seeing the world differently. Meanwhile, he was also getting into Zen Buddhism, meditating, and embracing simplicity ideas that would later define Apple's minimalist aesthetic. He even traveled to India in search of enlightenment, only to return with dysentery and a shaved head. Classic Jobs. So what do we learn from this chapter? That sometimes the best education happens outside the classroom. That curiosity and unconventional choices can lead to brilliance. And that, for Steve Jobs, dropping out was just the beginning of a much wilder journey. Picture this: a young, barefoot Steve Jobs, wandering through India, searching for enlightenment, while also designing video games for Atari. Only Steve could pull off being a hippie and a tech genius at the same time. So, how did he end up at Atari? Well, Steve had a knack for talking his way into things. He walked into Atari's office, told them he wouldn't leave until they hired him, and shockingly, it worked. The founder, Nolan Bushnell, saw something in him, a mix of brilliance and sheer audacity. Atari was the Wild West of gaming back then. No rules, just creativity. Steve wasn't the best engineer, but he had vision. He teamed up with Steve Wozniak, yes, that Wozniak, to create a game called Breakout*. Here's the twist. Jobs told was they had to finish it in 4 days. Offered him a tiny cut of the pay. Meanwhile, Jobs was also deep into Zen Buddhism. He'd sit for hours meditating, eat weird diets, and question everything. India called to him, so off he went barefoot, of course. He traveled for months, seeking spiritual masters, but ended up with dysentery instead. Not exactly the enlightenment he'd hoped for. Yet, India changed him. He saw beauty in simplicity, in stripping away the unnecessary. That philosophy would later define Apple's design. Oh, and he came back smelling interesting. Let's just say hygiene wasn't his top priority. Back at Atari, Jobs was. Well, Jobs. He'd show up late, argue with everyone, and occasionally walk out in a huff. But when he was on, he was on*. His time there was short, but it shaped him, merging tech with artistry, East with West. The gears of fate were beginning to turn.